And welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Jayme Marilyn.
And I'm Marilyn Brown. And today we are talking about how to prepare, how to mindfully prepare, and the importance of mindfully preparing for disasters and emergencies. So I think it's pretty obvious why I'm bringing this up now and kind of talking about it because there's been so many different weather emergencies and disasters, climate related disasters that people are experiencing. And it's something that, for me, moving to Southern California, I remember I moved here my first year and it was a really big fire season up in San Diego. It was like 2007. And there were some major fires up in San Diego at that time. And coming from the Midwest, it wasn't really something that I prepared for, really thought about in the home. I remember tornado drills and things like that as a kid at school, but it wasn't really something that we really thought about at home. And so moving here during that year, it was something that was really huge for me just to kind of see what could happen. And living downtown at the time where people were had lost their homes and were just kind of roaming around downtown San Diego because they had to evacuate and their houses were gone. And so it's something that we're in the midst of dealing with. And I think that, like a lot of things, I tend to avoid things that are uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable thinking about that. And so I wanted to start off by just kind of checking in with you of have you prepared or do you prepare? Kind of where are you at with disaster preparation for yourself?
Um, yeah, I don't really have like a always prepared kit or anything like that. I think it's just important to make sure you're plugged into what's going on.
Hmm.
So on my phone, on my computer, or my email, I think it's on my calendar too, are all the emergency settings so that you're
Mm-hmm.
aware of when things are happening. Um, yeah, so because I think a lot. I mean, sometimes things just happen out of the blue, and you're taken by surprise, and there's nothing you can do about that. But a lot of the time, there is you are given enough warning that if you can stay mindful and you take it seriously and you do your research, you have enough time to really prepare for what's coming. But the first step
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the awareness and making sure you're plugged in to those things. Because I know people who, with the hurricanes that just happened, until they were happening, they didn't even know they were coming. Like they were
Mm.
just not plugged into,
Yeah.
they don't watch the news, they don't do a lot of social media, they don't do
Hmm.
anything that would allow them to have an understanding of kind of what's happening.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point. I'm glad that you bring that up first, that really just staying plugged in and having a way to keep access is important. I think that, with everything, everybody has kind of a different interest in watching news and things like that. And so if, you can't expect everybody to follow Twitter as actively as people, but I think just recognizing that, making sure that you have a way of staying connected and knowing what's going on, even if it's just that you're checking, that you're checking like your local, local government's website regularly, just to kind of see that there's not any alerts or things posted, is very important. So I agree that, because just that awareness, a lot of times just being aware, you do have time to get things and to prepare to evacuate if you need to, things like that. And so we do have certain things where there's warning, and so we're able to kind of see and can make choices then. And I think um, one thing I think about, though, for myself is that there are times where we don't really know that something is going to be coming. I know, like with the fires that are going on right now up in NorCal, um, they are sparking so quickly in different areas and changing direction so quickly that people aren't really realizing that they're um, in the line of fire, and then it's happening so fast that they're just able to get out with the clothes on their back, maybe be able to put some things in a car. One thing that I recently, last year, I started volunteering. I joined the Medical Reserve Corps. which is a corps of volunteers through the government that if there's disasters in the area, they're sent out. And so there's doctors and nurses and also counselors and therapists, which is how I'm affiliated with it. And so it was interesting because one of the first things that they actually teach us in our training is how to prepare ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't really, again, it's something that I've kind of avoided and not been as mindful about as I would like to be, but kind of like thought about, like I'll see something on the news and I'll be like, oh, I need to get a kit, but then I won't actually kind of move forward and do it. And so when we had our training, one of the first trainings and orientations that we go to is how to prepare yourself and your family, and recognizing that everybody has to take care of themselves first, and first responders have to make sure that they're safe to be able to take care of everybody else. And so one of the things that they went through with us was just going and preparing a basic kit for yourself, a basic survival kit, like a 3-day kit with food and water for 3 days. If you have a pet, water and food for your pet for 3 days. The recommendation is like 1 gallon of water per day per person in the home, and preparing something like that. And, again, there are times where you may not even be able to get to that and get that out. But also, it is something that, being able to be mindful and do what we can to prepare ourselves so that if something does happen, that we at least are able to, have the kind of peace of mind of knowing like, okay, at least I have water for a couple of days if I don't have access. Because I think right now we're seeing just so many different opportunities where people just, it's happening so much that I think, again, for me, it's becoming more and more, I'm becoming more aware that I really need to, that being mindful of it is actually taking more action for myself rather than just kind of like thinking about it and then letting it slip my mind. And so a few months back, I actually intentionally did build a preparation kit for myself, and it's really small. It's very, very simple. And, but it's something that's giving me a little bit of, okay, well, at least I can kind of check something off the list that I've done for myself of being aware.
Right. Yeah. Two things. One, quickly going back about the being plugged in.
Hmm.
Just recommendation is that's also not, that doesn't mean you have to frantically search the internet every day for the news and be paranoid. There are services. I think Google Emergent. I don't know exactly what it's called, but I know Google has a service that you can sign up for. That if anything's within an area that you can designate, that they will email you, they will alert you. So it's coming, and you'll get live alerts as well for when things are happening. So there
Yeah.
are services out there that you can sign up for that will alert you, as opposed to you having to feel like you
Check.
always have to be checking and on top of everything, because our lives get busy and
Yeah.
it's hard to do that, and it becomes overwhelming when you try. And
Yeah.
the
Sure. I agree.
second thing, what what you've been saying brought up is for people who are in high risk emergency areas, if whether that be for fires or for earthquakes or for tornadoes or for really anything. I think being mindful, and it goes. I think it's a little more subtle than that. It's just, I think you can avoid a lot of the stress and the chaos and the fear that happens, because what a lot of people don't do is they're not prepared, and then when it happens, you have everybody rushing to trying to get things, and you see it on the TV of places running out of water and
Absolutely.
all
Yeah.
this stuff. And if you did have preparation all year round, you're avoiding all that stress, and you can focus on other things, making sure your family is safe, making sure you know where you're going, all these things that aren't part of you just having to worry about, are my basic needs now met, and that's what I have to fight for.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think those are really, really good points. And I think that um, having that, just being prepared to have that peace of mind. And so I think for myself, yeah, it's just helpful knowing, okay, I have that there. I also have something small that I keep in my car. I keep a gallon of water in my car. It's not a ton of water, but it's something that, I'm at the point where it's like, okay, I know if I'm, stranded somewhere, I'm prepared. And so then I'm not having to worry about those basic needs. And
Right.
I do like that you brought up the alerts because I think that's super important. It's not about being paranoid and focusing on it and checking on it all the time, but it's just about being accessible and making sure that you're accessible and have yourself available to be alerted. So yeah. So talking about being prepared, I think one thing that's important to be mindful of, aware of as well, which you brought up a little bit, is what the likelihood is of something in your area. So knowing if you're in a high risk area for fires, or if you're in an area that gets a lot of hurricanes, and kind of being aware of that and knowing, because I know a lot of times people aren't really plugged in into their community to kind of know what to expect. So if you've moved to a new area or something, it can be helpful just to connect with the local people in that area to know what types of things are actually important to prepare for.
Yeah, and what your resources are. It's interesting. I was up at a Buddhist temple in Pine Mountain, and as I was driving there, you could see a lot of the forest area had been burned at some point, and it's you can't really tell when in those areas because
Mm-hmm.
it's so dry that I mean something a fire that happened 10 years ago looks super fresh because it just
Mm-hmm.
things don't really grow back.
Right.
And I was walking around with one of the monks and was kind of asking about the fires because the fires were happening, and she had such a great rundown of how it all worked,
Mm.
and kind of and not only just where the firefighters are and where all this stuff is, but also her role
Mm.
in helping prevent it. She was telling me about how they have gardens and uh, they place the gardens in specific places so that they're low risk of starting a fire, and that the buildings where people live, there's a certain amount of water resources that would make it hard for fires to start there. So it's
Mm.
I think it's two things. It's important about knowing when how to protect yourself, but also knowing your role in helping when an emergency situation happens.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a very, very important point. And that's one thing that we've seen a lot in during these disasters is seeing how many people really are helping each other and really mobilizing to help. People with boats going out during the hurricanes and mobilizing to help. And I think that helps in the obvious and direct way that it's helping people, but I also think it helps manage those that are in the midst of the crisis themselves. Being
Mm-hmm.
able to be of service is very, very important and can kind of help us to manage ourselves and give us kind of a mission and something that's important, because a lot of times, I mean, these are people who have lost their homes, and rather than kind of sit and focus on all the things they've lost, they're helping other people. And I think that can really, really make a difference with how just to manage through a crisis. Um, One other thing about just knowing and I think on a different level thinking about, and this isn't something that people personally have a lot of stake in necessarily, but I think it's something that just think about kind of on a bigger scale, that um, how they built the gardens in that area and the water access to the buildings and things like that is so important. Knowing that you're in a very dry area where these fires are already prone, and how to prepare for that. And I think that that's something that's important, like city and kind of government planning wise, thinking about like what is this area, what materials do we need to be using, and having standards around that are actually going to be more um, conducive to that environment, and
Mm-hmm.
managing it if something does happen. And I don't know, that's something people can individually really do a lot about, but I think just kind of being aware of what your um, city and state standards are, and kind of what things they look at it as far as disaster planning can be important as well.
Yeah, and what's lacking in it as well, because I think a lot of the things uh, the the monk was telling me were not necessarily things that they're required to do. They were
Yeah.
half things that they're required to do, and then half things that were extra measures that they just learned themselves from
Mm.
talking to people about. And I think the
Mhm.
best way to do it is, yeah, you can read all about things online, but also there's lots of different trainings that are free. I mean, I think she learned just from talking and going into the nearby fire station and just asking
Mm.
questions and
Mhm.
talking about safety. And then you also build a relationship with the people who are going to be there if there is an emergency.
Mhm. Yeah, that's such a great point. So actually getting connected and being able to talk to the providers in the area, to the firefighters, and actually learn about it and find out what you can do on your own to help and to make things a little bit safer in your area. Yeah, I love that. And I think that's something that comes with mindfulness, comes with that. This was a monk that you were talking to, and being able to have that recognition of being mindful, to know that it's not just about what am I required to do, but also what's really going to be helpful, what's actually going to make a difference.
Right. And
Yeah.
there's also I don't know what word I want to use, um, hmm, like a soothing part of feeling and being prepared.
Hmm.
Because, yeah, it's not like to be mindful, you don't want to go through your life scared that there could be an emergency or disaster at any
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
But there is kind of well, what if something happened if you're not prepared? Where if you're prepared, there's a calmness, or like a, I still don't know the word I'm looking for, but I think, yeah,
Yeah.
you're just there's a reassurance in yourself that there's a level of preparedness, so you
Hmm.
can kind of separate yourself from the worry as much as
Yeah.
if you never think about it, and then all of a sudden there's I mean, I see it all the time with the fires happening all around Los Angeles recently. Is
Hmm.
there's kind of two reactions. There's the reactions from the people who I know are very prepared, and those tend to be very mindful, very informed kind
Hmm.
of reactions. And then I see a lot of people just panicking, and those are the people who have never thought about it, don't know where they would go, they don't have any kind of preparation, they have no plan if something were to happen. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to take that step for many reasons, but I think one is the fear of it. I know a lot of people who just get very anxious at the thought of being involved in a natural disaster or any kind of emergency like that. So it is very emotionally draining to even learn about it or prepare.
Right.
But I think it's also important. I mean, there's places you can go to get help if you are feeling a lot of anxiety around it. People
Mhm.
that can help you prepare and make you feel more comfortable and less anxious about it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're right. I think that a lot of it for people is that it's just so terrifying to think about that you would just rather not. It's just there's so many other things that are pressing, that are day to day need your attention, and so to put your attention towards something that's absolutely terrifying, you don't want to happen, but to actually have to not just put your attention to it, but go and prepare and purchase things and organize and make a plan, make a family plan, whatever that looks like, is definitely something that I think a lot of people avoid. And so you're right, there's kind of one of two reactions. And I think there's even an extreme reaction for people who have, like you said, made it where their entire life is around being afraid that something might happen. And I think that that's not, we're not recommending complete avoidance, and I'm definitely not recommending that you build your entire life around worrying about something happening. But I do think that that mindfulness of being able to prepare and just kind of know, okay, I've thought about this, I've talked to my family. That's something that's really important as well. If you live with people, if you have family members, discussing a plan if something happens, of where you guys can meet, a family evacuation plan for your house, a place close by to the home where you can meet up, things like that. Again, just to give you some peace of mind. I think that it's so uncomfortable to approach these things. But once you've done it and you've kind of done that work of actually thinking about it, I think that reassurance is definitely comforting and helpful. And it's also something that you have to stay mindful about, so it's not really effective to like prepare and then completely forget about it. for 2 years. You have to prepare and then go back and rotate things. And so I think with that, it keeps you aware. It keeps you
Hmm.
mindful and kind of checking in with the process.
Yeah, and I think this is obvious, but I think subconsciously, uh, people, a lot of people don't believe this. Is just because you're prepared doesn't mean it's going to happen. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of people feel that way. There's this idea that, well, if I ignore it and don't think about it, then it's not real. But if I prepare and I put actions towards it, then it's a real possibility. And I think that, yeah, I don't know if I have advice on how to get over that, but I think that's kind of a reaction I see from
Hmm.
a lot of people, is this idea that if it's not written down, it's not real type
Right.
thing, which is something I live by in like business and doing things, that until I have it scheduled and it's there, it's not real. But I think that can transfer into other things. And I do know a lot of people who are kind of that have that reaction to things.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. And it's interesting because I mean, I think there's different things. Like, I think that's definitely a very human reaction that we have to things, and kind of like that just, if it's not concrete, if it's not down, then it's not happening. But I also think there are a lot of other things that we prepare for that don't often happen or we don't ever experience, but we've kind of just been trained to prepare for them, kind of gotten into the habit, been conditioned to prepare for them. And so I think like this is something that we weren't really conditioned to prepare for very much. This isn't something that like is one of those things that you just kind of go about doing in your
Right.
life. And so I think that it is something that we can get more comfortable with, but we have to just kind of talk about it, check in with people. If you are very anxious about it, then, I love the idea of going to a class in your community. I see flyers for different places in LA where fire departments will put on trainings, different areas will put on trainings of how to prepare for an emergency and what to do, how to build your kit. And so I think seeking support around it, if it is something that really is bringing up a lot of anxiety to the point where you're completely avoiding it. But if it's something, that I do think it's something to be mindful of, that it's important to be mindful of, because things happen and they also don't. But when they do, we can, if we're prepared, it's definitely going to um, lead to a much more mindful response and being able to actually cope a lot more effectively. And so I think it's kind of one of those things to think, you know, discomfort right now, but potentially, peace of mind later.
Right. And I just had a thought, and I don't even know what the question is, but for people who really don't have the resources to prepare
Mm,
in a way that they should. I mean, if we're talking about being able to really be prepared for a, a disaster, that's really a privilege that only certain people have. And I mean, do you have any advice for people who really just don't have the resources to be adequately prepared?
that's a challenge. That's definitely a challenge, and I'm glad you bring it up. And I don't actually have any specific resources on that, but I do. There's on cdc.gov, on the CDC website, there's multiple different checklists to go through of how to prepare, and so they don't have help preparing, but basically how to make a very, very basic, low cost kit. Actually, there's you know what, somebody, is it, I get the two mixed up. I don't know if it's the 99-cent store or the Dollar Tree. I think it's one of the two. We have both of them in LA,
Mm-hmm.
so I get them mixed up. But I think it's the 99 cents only store. They actually have a checklist, and I think I don't remember how much it is, but they actually have a checklist of items that you can buy there that are, to prepare, with flashlights, batteries, things like that. So it's
Oh wow.
it's not free. by any means, but there are definitely ways to do it for, you know, maybe the cost of a couple of meals out, you know. But I do, I think for people who need resources for that, to help with that, I really unfortunately can't think of anything specific, but that, that's an option.
Yeah, because the only thing I can really think of is just check in with safe places that to go that are open to the public, and just kind of know where they are. Um, and I mean, I think everyone should do that because no matter how prepared you are or how many resources you have, I mean, if something just happens, I mean, you could be a billionaire, but that money may mean nothing in the situation. So just
Yeah,
knowing where to go
yeah,
is important. I don't think you can rely on uh, your money or your influence or whatever you think it is in every situation.
yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I mean, we're seeing that right now with what happened in Puerto Rico. I mean, people can't get cash. People can't get any of their resources. So yeah, I think that's important, that just being aware of where the shelters are, what resources the government has available to you and in your area, because we really, it's a very humbling thing, disaster. It's one of those things that can kind of really level, um, the kind of that privilege gap pretty quickly with people and having nothing and not having resources or access to water and food. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely an important point. So I'm trying to think of some last points. I think really just, um, I want everybody to just check in with themselves and with their family, with your local community, about preparation. So really just asking yourself, have I thought about how to prepare for a disaster? Have I done any preparation? Is this something that I need to be thinking about? And then checking in with your family, with the people, your close friends, your close community, and checking in with them and seeing if it's something that they've done. Might be a fun thing to like get together with friends and make make your kids together,
Mm-hmm.
or with your neighbors or something like that, kind of making it a community effort. Because I do think that, the scary things that we have to face, we're not meant to face things alone. We're social creatures, and so we're very community oriented. So I think realizing that this is something that um, we can connect with our community and get some support around it.
Right. And I think with mindfulness practice too, I think it's important to really stay as mindful as possible while you're in the middle of the disaster, because I mean, it can just be overwhelming and there can be a lot of panic and depression and fear and anger and all these very intense emotions. And I think just being able to hold on to as much mindfulness as you can will really help you just get through it in a healthier way.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's very important. So I think I already said the homework, which is basically just that I want people to check in with themselves and with their community. If you feel comfortable sharing, whether you're prepared or if you thought about it, if this video has changed your mind in any way or brought up some things that maybe you didn't think about, I just kind of want to hear, where people are at with this in their own lives.
Awesome. And you can do that on our Facebook group at Mindfulness in Action Civil Discourse.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Have a great week.